There is a peculiar kind of silence that precedes a storm. It's the quiet that stretches out, long and uneasy, as if the world itself is waiting for something to break. That was the silence that filled our penthouse that evening, a silence that had become all too familiar in the last few months. I was standing on the balcony, looking out over the city. The lights below sparkled like stars, a deceptive beauty masking the grime and corruption that festered in the shadows. The whiskey in my hand was smooth, but it did nothing to ease the tension coiling in my gut. Something was wrong, something I couldn't quite put my finger on, but that I felt in my bones. Anna was out again, which wasn't unusual. She'd been going out more often lately, sometimes with friends, sometimes alone. At first, I didn't think much of it. After all, we both had our own lives, our own spaces to breathe. But lately her absences had begun to gnaw at me, especially when she didn't answer her phone or returned home with a strange look in her eyes. A look that was distant, almost cold. I tried not to dwell on it, tried to tell myself it was just a phase. But the doubt lingered, festering in the back of my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening, something that was slowly pulling us apart. It was around midnight when I heard the door open. Anna walked in, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor. She was dressed to kill as usual, her long black dress clinging to her curves in a way that still took my breath away. But there was something different about her tonight, an edge to her that I hadn't seen before. "Good evening," she said, her voice smooth and casual as if nothing was out of the ordinary. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Good evening, you're home late." She shrugged, moving past me to pour herself a drink. "Just lost track of time, I guess." Her answer was vague, and it only added to the unease that had been building inside me. "Where were you?" She paused for a fraction of a second, just long enough for me to notice. "Out with some friends." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But there was something in her tone, something off about the way she avoided my eyes that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I didn't press further, though. I knew better than to push her when she was like this cool, distant, a wall between us that I couldn't quite penetrate. We sat in silence for a while, the tension between us palpable. I could feel the questions burning in my throat, but I swallowed them down, unsure if I was ready to hear the answers. Instead, I sipped my drink and watched her, trying to decipher the secrets she was keeping from me. And then, as if sensing my thoughts, she turned to me, her eyes meeting mine. "You trust me, Don T.U.?" she asked, her voice soft, almost vulnerable. It was a loaded question, one that hung in the air between us like a noose. I hesitated, searching her gaze for any hint of what she might be hiding. But all I saw was a cold, steely resolve, something that made my blood run cold. "Of course," I said finally, though the words felt hollow. Anna smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Good. Because trust is everything, isn't it?" I nodded, but the knot in my stomach tightened. There was something more to her words, something that I couldn't quite grasp, but that filled me with a deep sense of foreboding. As she got up to leave, I caught a glimpse of her phone screen lighting up with a message. She quickly turned it over, but not before I saw the name on the display, a name I didn't recognize. "Who is that?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. "Just a work thing," she replied too quickly. "Nothing important," but I wasn't convinced. There was something in the way she brushed off the question, something that made me wonder if there was more to her late nights and vague answers than she was letting on. And so, as Anna disappeared into the bedroom, I stayed behind, the doubts gnawing at me. There was a mystery unfolding before me, one that I wasn't sure I wanted to unravel, but knew I had to. Little did I know that this was only the beginning, that the truth I was about to uncover would shatter everything I thought I knew about my wife and about the life we had built together. The following morning, I woke up feeling slightly embarrassed about the suspicions that had plagued me the night before. It was ridiculous, really paranoia getting the better of me. After all, Anna had never given me any real reason to doubt her. Sure, things had been a little tense lately, but what marriage didn't go through its ups and downs? I found her in the kitchen, already dressed for the day, her hair pulled back into a sleek ponytail. She looked beautiful, as always, and for a moment I felt a pang of guilt. How could I have let my mind wander down such dark paths? She glanced up from her coffee, catching my eye, and offered me a warm smile. "Morning," she said, her voice bright and cheerful, no trace of the coldness I sensed last night. "I made you breakfast." On the counter, there was a plate of scrambled eggs and toast, something she hadn't done for me in a while. I couldn't help but smile back, the tension in my chest easing slightly. Maybe I had been overreacting. Maybe this was her way of making amends for the distance that had crept between us. "Thanks, babe," I replied, leaning in to kiss her cheek. She smelled like fresh jasmine, a scent I had always loved on her. "You didn't have to do that." "It is no big deal," she said with a shrug, but there was a softness in her eyes that hadn't been there last night. "I just felt like we haven't had much time together lately. I wanted to make it up to you." Her words were like a balm to my frayed nerves. Maybe she was right. We had both been busy, work had been crazy for me, and she'd have been swamped with her own projects. It made sense that we drifted apart a little, but it didn't mean there was something sinister going on. As we ate breakfast together, the conversation flowed easily, the way it used to. We talked about our plans for the weekend, laughed about an old inside joke, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like we were back on solid ground. The doubts from the previous night seemed silly in the light of day, like shadows that disappeared with the dawn. Later that morning, Anna mentioned she had to step out for a bit to run some errands. Normally, that might have set off alarm bells, but I was feeling more relaxed now, more trusting. Besides, she had been open with me, no secrets, no sneaky glances at her phone. She even left it on the kitchen counter, as if to show she had nothing to hide. "Don't worry," she said with a wink as she grabbed her keys. "I'll be back before you know it." I watched her go, a smile playing on my lips. This was the Anna I knew, the woman I had fallen in love with, the woman I had promised to spend my life with. The doubts that had gnawed at me seemed distant now, replaced by a renewed sense of connection. It felt like we had turned a corner, like maybe things were finally getting back to normal. While she was out, I busied myself with work, trying to catch up on some overdue tasks. The hours flew by, and before I knew it, the afternoon had slipped into evening. True to her word, Anna returned home just as the sun was beginning to set, her arms full of shopping bags. "Looks like you had a productive day," I teased as she set the bags down. "You could say that," she laughed, holding up a bottle of wine. "I even got us something to celebrate getting through this crazy week." We spent the evening together, sipping wine, cooking dinner, and talking about everything and nothing. The tension that had lingered between us was gone, replaced by a sense of ease that I hadn't felt in a long time. It was as if the fears of last night had been nothing more than a bad dream, one that faded away as soon as I woke up. As we curled up on the couch later that night, Anna rested her head on my shoulder, and I felt a warmth spread through me. Maybe things hadn't been perfect lately, but every relationship had its rough patches. What mattered was that we were still together, still willing to put in the effort to make it work. I was about to drift off to sleep when she spoke, her voice soft and full of affection. "I love you, you know that, right?" "I know," I murmured, kissing the top of her head. "I love you too." And in that moment, I believed it. I believed that whatever had been causing the distance between us was behind us now. The doubts that had once seemed so pressing had vanished, leaving only the quiet, steady beat of our life together. Little did I know, this calm was just the eye of the storm. The real tempest was still waiting, lurking just beyond the horizon, ready to strike when I least expected it. For the next few days, everything seemed to return to normal. Anna and I fell back into our usual routine. The tension that had been hanging over us seemingly dissipated. We laughed more, talked more, and even spent a weekend away in the countryside. Just the two of us. It was almost like we were rediscovering each other, rekindling the spark that had been dimmed by time and routine. But even as things improved between us, a small voice in the back of my mind wouldn't let me fully relax. It was the kind of nagging doubt that's hard to shake, the kind that lingers even when you want to believe everything is fine. I told myself it was just residual paranoia, the remnants of my overactive imagination from the other night. Yet that voice continued to whisper, warning me not to let my guard down completely. It wasn't until one late evening, when Anna was out again, that my suspicions began to solidify into something more tangible. She had told me she was meeting some old friends from college, a rare reunion she couldn't miss. I had no reason to doubt her after all. She had been open with her plans, even inviting me to join if I wanted to. But I had declined, deciding to give her some space while I took care of some work at home. The house was quiet, almost eerily so, as I sat in my office, half-heartedly going through emails. A few hours passed, and I realized that Anna hadn't called or texted to check in. It wasn't like her to be completely silent. especially when she knew I was home alone. I glanced at the clock. It was nearing midnight. I brushed off the unease, telling myself that she was probably just caught up in conversation and had lost track of time. But the voice in my head wouldn't he let up, urging me to check on her, just to be sure. I debated whether to call her, but something held me back, pride maybe, or a fear of appearing too clingy. Instead, I decided to go for a walk to clear my head. The cool night air helped a little. But as I wandered aimlessly through the empty streets, my mind kept returning to Anna. The thought of her out there with her friends enjoying herself without me, it wasn't jealousy exactly, but something close. It was a feeling of being on the outside, of not fully knowing what was going on in her life. I was about to turn back toward home when I passed a small, dimly lit bar on a quiet side street. It was one of those places you'd only notice if you were looking for it, the kind of place where secrets were kept hidden in the dark corners. I wouldn't have paid it any attention, but as I glanced through the window, something caught my eye. There, in the farthest booth, half shrouded in shadow, I saw Anna. She was sitting with a man, their heads close together in deep conversation. My heart skipped a beat as I recognized him, the same man from the video. The one with the scar, the one whose presence had made my skin crawl. The man who I now realized was not just some distant acquaintance, but someone much more significant. I froze, my breath catching in my throat as I watched them. Anna's hand rested on the table, inches away from his, and there was an intimacy in the way they leaned toward each other, as if the world outside didn't exist. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, but there was no mistaking it now. The way they looked at each other, the way she smiled at him, it was all too familiar. It was a look I hadn't seen from her in a long time, and certainly not directed at me. My first instinct was to burst in there, to confront them both, to demand an explanation. But something stopped me, a cold, calculating part of me that told me to wait, to watch. I needed to know the full extent of this betrayal before I acted. And so I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest as I watched my wife with another man. Eventually, Anna glanced at her watch and they both stood up. I quickly stepped back into the shadows, out of sight. They exited the bar together, walking close, their shoulders brushing as they made their way down the street. I followed at a distance, my mind a whirlwind of emotions, rage, pain, disbelief, but also a strange icy calm that allowed me to think clearly. They didn't go far, just around the corner to a small, nondescript hotel. I watched as they entered, and when the door closed behind them, a cold certainty settled over me. This was it, the proof I had tried so hard to deny. Anna was cheating on me, and not just with anyone, but with someone dangerous. Someone who had the potential to upend my entire life. But as I stood there staring at the hotel, I didn't feel the rush of despair I might have expected. Instead, a new resolve took hold of me. If Anna thought she could betray me, if she thought she could humiliate me like this, she had no idea who she was dealing with. The time for doubt was over. Now it was time to plan. The walk back to the penthouse felt like a dream, each step heavy with the weight of what I'd just seen. The city buzzed around me, people going about their lives, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. But I was no longer part of that world. My mind was elsewhere, coldly calculating the next move. By the time I reached our front door, any remnants of the shock and disbelief had hardened into something else entirely. Betrayal is a powerful thing. It has a way of stripping you down, laying bare your rawest emotions. But in that vulnerability, there's also a strange clarity. I saw things now with a precision I hadn't known before. Anna had made her choice. Now it was my turn. She wasn't at home yet, which was just as well. I needed time to think, to piece together what I knew and figure out how best to use it. I poured myself another drink, the amber liquid swirling in the glass like the thoughts in my mind. I'd always been a patient man, a trait that had served me well in business. You don't build a career like mine by acting on impulse. It takes careful planning. The ability to see the long game, to anticipate your opponent's moves before they make them. And now I would apply that same ruthlessness to my personal life. First, I needed more information. The man I'd seen Anna with, the one she was clearly entangled with, who was he, really? The scarred face and the dangerous aura told me he was no ordinary man. He had the look of someone who thrived in the shadows, someone who wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty. A mafioso, perhaps? It would explain the secrecy, the late nights, the hushed tones. But knowing he was dangerous wasn't enough. I needed to know his weaknesses, his connections, the leverage I could use against him. And to do that, I needed help, discreet professional help. This wasn't something I could handle on my own. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. A private investigator I had used a few years back for a different, less personal matter. He was good, one of the best in the city, and he owed me a favor. The phone rang twice before he picked up. "It's late. What is this about?" His voice was gruff, but there was a sharpness to it, a readiness that told me he was always on the clock. "I need your services again," I replied, my tone calm and measured. "This time it is personal." There was a pause, then a low chuckle. "Personal, huh? That's usually more complicated." "I don't care about the complexity. I need information. I want you to find out everything you can about a certain man, who he is, what he does, who he answers to. Name? I don't have it yet, but I'll send you a picture. That should be enough to get started." "All right. I'll need a couple of days. You will have what you need by tomorrow," I said, my voice hardening. "And I want results as quickly as possible. Money is no object." There was another pause, longer this time. "Understood," he said finally. "Send me what you have." I hung up, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. The first move had been made. Now it was a matter of waiting, gathering the pieces and fitting them together. The game had begun, and I intended to win. As I sat back, the adrenaline still pulsing through me, I heard the sound of keys in the lock. Anna was home. I composed myself quickly, slipping into the role of the unsuspecting husband. There was no need to confront her yet, no need to reveal what I knew. That would come later, when I had all the cards in my hand. For now, I would play the part, bide my time, and let her continue her charade. She stepped into the living room, a faint smile on her lips as she saw me. "You are still up? Just waiting for you," I replied, my tone light. "Did you have a good time?" "It was nice," she said, kicking off her shoes and coming over to sit beside me, catching up with old friends. I nodded, watching her closely. There was no sign of guilt in her eyes, no hint of the double life she was leading. She was good. I had to give her that. But she had underestimated me. We talked for a few more minutes, the conversation easy, unremarkable. Then she kissed me on the cheek, a casual, almost dismissive gesture, and headed to bed. I stayed behind, listening to her footsteps fade as she climbed the stairs. Alone again, I let out a slow breath. The rage that had been simmering inside me had cooled into something else, something more dangerous. I was ready now, ready to take the next step. Anna had played her hand and she thought she had won. But she was wrong. The real game was just beginning. Part 5. Pieces of the Puzzle. The next day, I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. Anna was already gone, leaving a note on the kitchen counter about a lunch meeting she had with a client. The handwriting was neat, precise, as if nothing were amiss. It was almost laughable how easily she slipped between her roles: the dutiful wife, the career woman, and, as I now knew, the deceitful lover. But today, I had my own agenda. I sent the photo of Anna and her lover from the bar to the private investigator, adding a few details about the location and time. The reply came almost immediately. "Got it. I'll be in touch soon." With that taken care of, I went about my day as usual, though my mind was anything but ordinary. It was hard to focus at work, my thoughts constantly drifting back to Anna, to the image of her with that man. I kept replaying the scene in my head, analyzing every detail, every gesture. The way she leaned into him, the way she smiled, these were things I couldn't unsee, no matter how much I wanted to. The investigator-esque call came in the late afternoon, just as I was finishing up a meeting. I excused myself, stepping out into the hallway to take it. "I've got some initial information," he said, his voice low. "The guy in the photo, he's not just some random thug. His name is Victor Petrova. He is well known in certain circles, if you know what I mean." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Mafia?" "Something like that," the investigator confirmed. "He is connected, but not in the traditional sense. He is more of an independent operator, handles things that others want to touch. You know the type." I did. Men like Victor were the ones who thrived in the gray areas of the law, who made their living off the fear and desperation of others. Dangerous, unpredictable, and willing to do whatever it took to get what they wanted. "What is his angle?" I asked, my mind racing. Hard to say at this point. "He has got his hands in a lot of different pies: blackmail, extortion, contract work. If he is involved with your wife, it is not just for fun. He is after something." I clenched my jaw, the pieces slowly falling into place. This wasn't just about an affair. Victor was using Anna for something, something that could be far more damaging than just a broken marriage. "Keep digging," I said, my voice steely. I need to know everything about him, who he's working with, what his next move might be. Already on it, the investigator replied. I'll update you as soon as I have more. I ended the call, feeling the weight of what I was uncovering. This was no longer just about Anna's betrayal. It was about something much bigger, something that could destroy everything I had built. If Victor was using her, then she was more than just unfaithful. She was a pawn in a dangerous game. That evening, Anna returned home, her usual cheerful self, as if nothing had changed. We had dinner together, talked about our days, and everything seemed perfectly normal on the surface. But beneath that surface, a storm was brewing, one that she had no idea was coming. I watched her closely, studying her every move, every word, looking for any sign that she might suspect I knew. But there was nothing. She was calm, confident, completely unaware that her carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down. After dinner, we settled on the couch, a glass of wine in hand, as we watched some mindless show on TV. I played the role of the loving husband to perfection, laughing at all the right moments, nodding along with her comments. But my mind was elsewhere, spinning through the possibilities, the strategies, the ways I could turn this situation to my advantage. Anna leaned into me, resting her head on my shoulder, and I felt the familiar warmth of her body against mine. It was strange, knowing what I did now, to feel that connection still lingering between us. But it wasn't enough to sway me. The bond we once had was tainted, corrupted by her lies. As the night wore on, she began to doze off, her breathing slow and steady. I gently eased her off me, letting her settle into the cushions, and stood up, taking a moment to watch her sleep. She looked so peaceful, so innocent. It would have been easy to forget everything, to pretend this was just another ordinary night in our ordinary life. But I couldn't forget. I wouldn't forget. The wheels were already in motion, and there was no turning back. I made my way to the study, closing the door quietly behind me. The investigator's information sat on my desk, waiting. It was time to dive deeper, to start laying the groundwork for what would come next. The plan was forming, slowly but surely, in the darkest corners of my mind. Anna and her lover might think they had the upper hand, but they didn't realize the game they were playing was one I had mastered long ago. They had drawn first blood, but the final blow would be mine. The days that followed were a blur of deception, carefully woven lies, and quiet observation. I became an actor in my own life, playing the part of the oblivious husband while meticulously gathering every piece of information I could on Victor Petrova and his connection to Anna. The more I uncovered, the more dangerous the situation became. But with that danger came clarity of purpose, of action. Anna continued her routine as if nothing had changed. She went to work, met with her so-called clients, and returned home each evening with the same warm smile, the same gentle touch. It was almost surreal how easily she slipped into her role, as if the affair with Victor was just another part of her day, no different from grocery shopping or answering emails. But now, I knew better. I knew what she was hiding behind those perfect smiles and affectionate words, and soon I would know exactly how deep her involvement went. The investigator delivered his next report on a rainy Thursday evening. I sat in my study, the sound of raindrops tapping against the windows, as I read through the details with cold, clinical precision. Victor Petrova was more than just a Mafia associate. He was a key player in an underground network that specialized in high-stakes extortion and blackmail. He had a reputation for being ruthless, for getting what he wanted by any means necessary. And according to the report, his latest venture involved a series of high-profile businessmen in the city, all of whom had mysteriously fallen victim to scandalous leaks and financial ruin. The pieces were coming together now. Victor wasn't just after Anna for the thrill of an affair. He was using her as leverage, as a way to get to me. My business connections, my wealth, my influence, everything that I had built was now a target in his game. And Anna? She was either too blind to see it or too far gone to care. Either way, she was in deeper than she realized. The final piece of the puzzle came in the form of a bank statement, one that showed a series of large, unexplained withdrawals from our joint account, all within the past few weeks. The money had been funneled into an offshore account, one that was linked to Victor's network. Anna had been siphoning off our funds bit by bit, feeding the beast that was slowly tightening its grip around our lives. I stared at the statement, the rage bubbling up inside me, but I forced it down. Anger wouldn't have served me now. What I needed was control, a clear head to navigate the treacherous waters I was about to enter. I knew I couldn't confront Anna yet, not until I had everything in place. The plan was still forming, but it was becoming clearer with each passing day. I needed to dismantle Victor S. operation, piece by piece, and take away everything he thought he had won. But more than that, I needed to make Anna see the consequences of her actions to make her understand the gravity of the choices she had made. That night, I went to bed with a new resolve. Anna was already asleep, her body curled up next to mine, unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. I watched her for a long moment, a strange mix of emotions swirling inside me: love, hate, pity, and something darker, something I didn't quite recognize. She had betrayed me in the worst possible way, but what she didn't realize was that I was no longer the man she thought she could manipulate. I had played the fool long enough. Now it was time for me to take back control. The next morning, I made a few quiet calls, setting the final pieces of my plan in motion. There would be no more waiting, no more watching from the sidelines. The time for action had come. Anna noticed the change in me, but she didn't question it. If anything, she seemed relieved, as if the distance that had grown between us was finally starting to close. She had no idea how wrong she was. I played my part perfectly, giving her no reason to suspect that I knew everything, that I was already preparing for the inevitable confrontation. In the days that followed, I laid the groundwork for what was to come. I met with lawyers, discreetly moved funds, and made arrangements that would ensure Anna and Victor S. schemes would crumble before they even had a chance to succeed. It was a delicate dance, one that required patience and precision, but I was more than up to the task. Anna S.'s behavior remained unchanged, but I could see the cracks beginning to show. There were moments when she seemed distracted, her mind elsewhere, as if she was struggling to keep up with the lies she had woven. She would glance at her phone, her expression tense, and then quickly hide it when she noticed me watching. She was unraveling, slowly but surely, and it was only a matter of time before the truth would come crashing down around her. And when it did, I would be ready. The stage was set, the players in place. All that was left was to wait for the right moment, the perfect opportunity to strike. Anna had made her choice, and now she would have to live with the consequences. Revenge was no longer just a dish best served cold. It was a storm, brewing on the horizon, ready to unleash its fury on those who had wronged me. And when it did, there would be no escape. As the days passed, the tension in the air became almost palpable. It was as if the universe itself knew that something was about to break, that the calm facade we had maintained for so long was on the verge of crumbling. Anna continued her charade, playing the role of the devoted wife, but I could see the unease in her eyes, the way her smiles never quite reached them anymore. She was slipping, and she knew it, but I kept up the act, letting her believe that I was none the wiser. It was crucial that she thought she still had control, that I was blind to the deception she and Victor were weaving. Meanwhile, the pieces of my plan were falling into place with a precision that made me feel both exhilarated and deadly calm. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, Anna seemed more distracted than usual. She picked at her food, her mind clearly elsewhere. I watched her, quietly observing, waiting for the right moment to press just enough to see if she would crack. "Long day?" I asked casually, taking a sip of wine. She looked up, startled, as if she hadn't even realized I was there. "What? Oh yes, just a lot going on at work." I nodded, feigning understanding. "Anything you want to talk about?" For a moment she hesitated, her fork hovering over her plate. It was a split second, but I saw the indecision in her eyes, the battle she was fighting within herself, but then she shook her head and forced a smile. "No, nothing worth mentioning, just the usual stuff." I smiled back, but inside I felt a flicker of satisfaction. She was hiding something, something important, and it was tearing her apart. But she wouldn't share it with me. How could she, when she was too deeply entrenched in her lies? As the evening wore on, I kept the conversation light, steering it away from anything that might raise her suspicions. But as we finished dinner and moved to the living room, I made my first move. "I've been thinking," I said as we settled onto the couch. "We should take a trip, just the two of us, get away from all the stress for a while." Anna blinked, clearly caught off guard. A trip? Yeah, I continued smoothly. We have both been so busy lately. It would be nice to just disconnect. What do you think? She hesitated again, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was probably weighing the risks, wondering if she could afford to leave Victor behind, even for a few days. But she didn't want to raise any alarms, so she nodded slowly. That sounds nice, she said, though her voice lacked enthusiasm. Where were you thinking? Maybe somewhere quiet, the mountains or a secluded beach, somewhere we can just relax and not worry about anything else. The idea seemed to appeal to her, or at least the version of herself that she was still trying to convince me existed. She smiled, a bit more genuinely this time, and leaned against me. Yeah, she said softly. That sounds perfect. I held her close, pretending to be the loving husband she wanted me to be, all the while knowing that she was buying into the illusion I was carefully crafting. This trip wasn't just a vacation. It was a carefully planned part of the trap I was setting. Over the next few days, I made all the arrangements. I booked a remote cabin in the mountains, a place where we would be completely alone, with no distractions and no interruptions. I made sure everything was perfect, luxurious, comfortable, the kind of place that would lull her into a false sense of security. And all the while, I continued to gather information on Victor. The private investigator had uncovered more details, bank records, connections, and most importantly, a series of encrypted messages between Anna and Victor that detailed their plans. It was all there, laid out in black and white: the money transfers, the carefully orchestrated leaks that would destabilize my business, and even a plan to make it look like I had been involved in illegal activities. They were setting me up to take the fall, to ruin my reputation and leave me with nothing. But they hadn't accounted on me knowing the rules of their game. And they certainly hadn't counted on me turning the tables. The day before we were set to leave for the mountains, I made my final preparations. I ensured that my assets were protected, that the key players in my company were aware of what was coming, and that I had the evidence needed to expose Anna and Victor S. betrayal at the exact right moment. That evening, as we packed our bags, Anna seemed almost at ease, as if the prospect of a getaway had dulled the edge of her anxiety. She chatted about the cabin, about how nice it would be to just relax and disconnect from everything. I played along, pretending to be excited, knowing that the real disconnect was about to happen in a way she could never imagine. As we climbed into bed that night, Anna curled up next to me, her head on my chest. I stroked her hair, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing as she drifted off to sleep. I wondered if she had any inkling of what was about to unfold, if some part of her subconscious knew that this trip would mark the beginning of the end. But if she did, she gave no sign. She slept peacefully, completely unaware that the life she had so carefully constructed was about to be torn apart. And as I lay there, staring up at the ceiling, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The pieces were all in place, the trap was set, and all that was left was to spring it. Tomorrow, we would go on our little trip, and by the time we returned, everything would be different. The drive to the cabin was picturesque, the winding roads flanked by towering trees and the distant peaks of the mountains. Anna seemed to relax more with each passing mile, her earlier tension melting away as we left the city behind. She hummed along to the music playing softly on the radio, a small smile tugging at her lips. She had no idea this was the calm before the storm. I kept the conversation light, commenting on the scenery, asking her about the plans she had for our time away. She responded easily, her guard completely down. It was almost painful to watch how effortlessly she could slip into the role of a loving wife, how convincingly she could pretend that everything was normal. But as we drew closer to the cabin, I noticed a subtle change in her demeanor. She grew quieter, more contemplative, as if something was weighing on her mind. I wondered if she was starting to second-guess her choices, if the reality of what she had done was beginning to catch up with her. Or perhaps it was the isolation, the knowledge that, out here, there would be no distractions, no excuses to avoid the truth. The cabin was nestled in a secluded spot surrounded by trees and overlooking a serene lake. It was exactly as I had promised: quiet, peaceful, the perfect place to unwind. But as we stepped inside and began unpacking, I could see that Anna S.'s earlier calm had been replaced by something else. Anxiety, perhaps, or guilt. I decided to test the waters. "Is everything okay?" I asked casually as I placed our bags in the bedroom. "You seem a little off." Anna looked up, startled by the question. "Oh, I am fine," she said quickly, forcing a smile. "Just thinking about some things." "Work?" I pressed, watching her closely. She hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, work. It's been a lot lately." I didn't push further. I could see the conflict in her eyes, the way she was struggling to keep her emotions in check. She was on the edge, teetering between the life she had chosen and the consequences she hadn't yet faced. And I knew it wouldn't take much to tip her over. We spent the rest of the afternoon settling in, exploring the area around the cabin, and pretending, at least on the surface, that this was just another weekend getaway. But the tension between us was growing, the unspoken truth hanging heavy in the air. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned a deep shade of purple, we sat on the porch with glasses of wine, watching the stars begin to appear. It was a beautiful night, the kind that would have felt romantic, even magical under different circumstances. But there was no magic here. Only the cold, hard reality of what was about to unfold. Anna was unusually quiet, staring out at the lake as if lost in thought. I could tell she was building up to something, struggling to find the right words. And as I watched her, I felt a strange sense of anticipation, knowing that this was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment when she might finally break. "John," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "there is something I need to tell you." I kept my expression neutral, my heart pounding in my chest. "What is it?" She took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she set down her glass. I've made some mistakes. Big mistakes." I could see the tears welling up in her eyes, the way her emotions were threatening to spill over. She was on the brink of confession, teetering on the edge of the truth, and all I had to do was nudge her a little further. "What kind of mistakes?" I asked softly, keeping my tone gentle, coaxing. Anna looked away, her gaze fixed on the dark water of the lake. "I've been involved with someone I shouldn't have been." There it was. The admission I had been waiting for, the crack in the facade she had so carefully maintained. But I couldn't let her see my satisfaction, couldn't let her know that I already knew everything. "How long?" I asked, my voice still calm, though inside I was seething. "A few months," she admitted, her voice shaking. "It started off as nothing, just a distraction, but it became more than that." She was crying now, tears slipping down her cheeks as she finally looked at me, her eyes pleading for some kind of understanding, some form of forgiveness. "I'm so sorry, John," she whispered. "I never meant for it to go this far. I never meant to hurt you." I stared at her, the woman I had loved, the woman who had betrayed me in the worst possible way. She was finally baring her soul, finally admitting to the sins she had committed, but instead of the rage I expected to feel, there was only a cold, hollow emptiness inside me. "I don't know what to say," I replied, my voice distant, as if the words were coming from someone else. She reached out to touch my hand, but I pulled away, standing up abruptly. I couldn't bear to let her touch me, not now, not after everything. "I need some air," I said, turning away from her. "I need to think." Anna didn't try to stop me. She just sat there, her face crumpled with grief, as I walked away from the porch and into the darkness. But I wasn't going far. I just needed a moment to clear my head, to remind myself that this was part of the plan, that this was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment when Anna finally realized the gravity of her actions. The trap was set. Now it was only a matter of time before it snapped shut. I stood by the edge of the lake, the cool night air filling my lungs, and stared out at the water. The calm surface reflected the stars above, a perfect mirror of the sky. But beneath that calm exterior, there was a storm, brewing, a storm that would tear everything apart. Anna's confession had been the final piece of the puzzle, the last confirmation I needed that she had chosen her path. She had played her part, and now it was time for me to play mine. I would give her one last night, one last moment of peace before I unleashed the storm. After all, the calm before the strike is often the most deceptive. Tomorrow, everything would change. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a sharp contrast to the turmoil brewing inside me. The tranquility of the cabin, the serene beauty of the lake, all felt like a cruel joke, mocking the storm I was about to unleash. As the sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the ground, I knew that today was the day. Anna was still asleep when I quietly slipped out of bed. I stood over her for a moment, watching her peaceful expression, the gentle rise and fall of her chest as she breathed. It was hard to reconcile this image of my wife, the woman I had loved for so many years, with the reality of what she had done, but the truth was undeniable. And the time for mercy had passed. I had planned every detail, calculated every move. The evidence I had gathered against Victor and Anna was damning enough to ruin them both, enough to ensure that they could never recover from the fallout. But I wasn't just going to destroy them financially. This wasn't about money or power anymore. This was personal. I left the cabin quietly, driving into the nearest town to make the final arrangements. The private investigator had delivered everything I needed: the documentation, the evidence, and most importantly, the leverage that would make this revenge complete. It was all there, waiting for me to pull the trigger. By the time I returned, Anna was awake, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, looking out over the lake. She seemed lost in thought, her face pale, as if the weight of her confession the night before was still pressing down on her. She didn't notice me at first as I approached, and for a moment I wondered if she had any idea what was coming. "Morning," I said, my voice calm, betraying none of the rage simmering beneath the surface. She looked up startled and forced a small smile. "Morning." I sat down beside her, the silence between us thick with unspoken words. She seemed unsure, hesitant, as if waiting for me to say something, to react to her confession. But I kept my emotions in check, letting the tension build. "Did you sleep well?" I asked, my tone casual, almost too casual. She nodded, though her eyes were shadowed with guilt, as well as I could, considering everything. I let that hang in the air for a moment before I responded. "I have been thinking about what you said last night," I began, watching her closely. "About your mistakes." Anna looked down, her hands trembling slightly as she held her coffee cup. "John?" "I know," I interrupted, my voice suddenly sharp, cutting through her words. "Let me finish." She fell silent, her eyes wide with fear and confusion as she sensed the shift in my demeanor. "You said you made mistakes," I continued, my tone cold, each word deliberate. "But what you did was more than a mistake, Anna. You didn't just betray me, you conspired with a criminal, you tried to destroy my life, and you thought you could walk away from it without facing the consequences." Her face drained of color, and she opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She looked at me with a mixture of fear and desperation, realizing that this was not the conversation she had been hoping for. "I know about Victor," I said, my voice like ice. "I know everything. The money you funneled to him, the plans you made to ruin me, the lies you told to cover your tracks. I know it all." Anna gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "John, please, I didn't mean for it to go this far." You were what?" I snapped, my anger finally breaking through. "Caught up in the excitement? Seduced by the danger? Or were you just so blinded by greed that you didn't care who you hurt?" She started to cry, her tears falling freely now, but I didn't soften. "I couldn't John, I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I was stupid, I was wrong, but I love you. I never stopped loving you." "I thought we could stop," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Just stop." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the documents, the evidence that would seal her fate. I dropped them on the table in front of her, watching as she stared at them in horror. "These are your bank records," I said, my voice deadly calm. "The ones that show exactly how much money you have funneled to Victor over the past few months. And these," I pulled out another set of papers, "are the messages between you and him discussing how you plan to bring me down. It is all here, Anna. Every lie, every betrayal." She looked at the papers, then back at me, her eyes wide with terror. "John, please don't do this. We can fix this. We can make it right." "Fix it?" I echoed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "There's no fixing this. You've made your bed, Anna, and now you're going to lie in it." I stood up, walking to the edge of the porch, staring out at the lake. The calm surface reflected the storm within me, and I knew that this was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment when I would finally take back control. "I have already made arrangements," I said, my back still to her. "By the time we get back to the city, everything will be in motion. The authorities will have the evidence they need to arrest Victor, and you are going to confess everything, every single detail of what you have done. If you cooperate, maybe they'll go easy on you." She cried out, a desperate anguish sound that echoed through the still morning air. "John, no, you can do this to me." I turned to face her, my expression hard, unyielding. You did this to yourself, Anna. You betrayed me, and now you are going to pay the price. She fell to her knees, her face crumpled in despair, but I felt nothing as I watched her. No pity, no remorse, only a cold satisfaction that justice was finally being served. Please, she whispered, her voice broken. I am begging you, John. Dawn T, do this. But it was too late. The wheels were already in motion and there was no turning back. I had given her every chance to come clean, every opportunity to stop this before it went too far. But she had chosen her path, and now she would have to walk it. I left her there on the porch, her sobs fading into the distance as I walked away. There was nothing more to say, nothing more to do. The storm had broken, and all that was left was to watch as the pieces fell where they may. As I drove away from the cabin, leaving Anna behind, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. The revenge I had planned for so long had been executed perfectly, and there was no going back. Anna had destroyed everything we had, but in the end, she had destroyed herself as well. And as I disappeared into the horizon, I knew that I was finally free. The drive back to the city was uneventful, the kind of journey where every mile feels like a step closer to closure. The weight of what I had set in motion hung over me, but not like a burden. It was more like the satisfying heaviness of a task well done, the final stages of a plan that had been meticulously executed. When I pulled into the driveway of our penthouse, the lights were on, casting a warm glow into the evening twilight. It looked inviting, peaceful, as if nothing had changed. But I knew better. I knew the calm facade was just that, a facade, hiding the chaos that had been brewing beneath the surface for months. I stepped inside, half expecting Anna to be there, waiting, her face filled with the anxiety that had marked her demeanor since her confession. But the penthouse was silent, unnervingly so. I called her name, my voice echoing through the empty rooms, but there was no response. As I walked through the penthouse, checking each room, a sense of finality settled over me. I had anticipated this moment, prepared for it, and now it was here. The culmination of everything I had worked for, every lie I had uncovered, every deceit I had endured. When I reached the study, I stopped in the doorway, my gaze falling on the figure crumpled on the floor. There, lying motionless, was Anna. Her skin was pale, her body twisted awkwardly, and beside her was an empty bottle of pills. Her eyes, once so full of life, now stared blankly at the ceiling, unseeing. I walked slowly to her side, kneeling beside her. Her body was cold to the touch, the warmth of life already gone. The note beside her was brief, the ink smeared as if she had been crying while writing it. I can live with what I have done. I am sorry, John. Please forgive me. I read the words twice, then set the note aside, feeling nothing but a deep, abiding sense of completion. This was it, the end game. Anna had made her final move, and it was exactly what I had expected. She had taken the only way out that she could see, the one that spared her from facing the full weight of the consequences that were about to come crashing down on her. But unlike what some might expect, there was no regret in me, no pity, no second thoughts. She had chosen her path. She had betrayed me, plotted against me, and aligned herself with a man who sought to ruin everything I had built. Her death was just the final, inevitable step in a chain of events she had set in motion the moment she decided to betray me. I stood up, looking down at her body one last time, feeling a cold satisfaction settle into my bones. This wasn't some tragic ending, it was justice. Anna had gambled with everything, and she had lost. And now she had paid the ultimate price. The authorities arrived shortly after I called them, their questions perfunctory as they assessed the scene. I answered calmly, explaining the situation, handing over the evidence I had meticulously gathered. There was nothing left to hide, no secrets to keep. The story was simple. My wife had betrayed me, and when faced with the consequences, she had taken her own life. It was all so clean, so final. As they took her body away, I watched from the doorway, my mind already moving forward. Victor would soon be in handcuffs, his network dismantled, his power stripped away. He would learn too late that he had tangled with the wrong man. Anna's death would only speed up his downfall. Without her, he had no leverage, no way to fight back. When the authorities left, the penthouse was quiet again, just as it had been when I arrived. But this time, the silence was different. It wasn't oppressive or unsettling. It was peaceful, the kind of peace that comes from knowing a chapter has been closed for good. I walked to the balcony looking out over the city. The lights twinkled in the distance, the world continuing as if nothing had happened. But I knew that everything had changed. The people who had tried to bring me down were gone, and I was still standing. As I stood there, I felt no remorse, no lingering sadness. Anna's death wasn't a loss to me. It was the natural conclusion to her betrayal, the final act in a drama that had played out exactly as I had envisioned. There was no room for regret, no need for second thoughts. She had made her choices, and I had made mine. Revenge, I realized, wasn't just a dish best served cold, it was a cleansing fire, burning away everything that sought to destroy me, leaving nothing but strength and resolve in its wake. And as I turned back toward the penthouse, I felt only one thing: victory.